Hello again, I'm Ruth, and today I'm going to be talking about three versions of Agatha Christie's Death on the Nile. I'm not going to be spoiling who the murderer is, so you can still watch any of these versions and go throughout, well, that was suspicious, or they did it. So I hope you enjoy. So starting with the 1978 version, which is my favourite version, starring Peter Ustinov as Hercule Poirot, it's got an ensemble cast. There are so many famous faces, as you can see from the poster, and it starts off really similarly to the book. It has Lynette driving through town in her fancy car, and people whispering about her and saying how unfair it is that she's both hot and loaded. She goes to her house, and her friend Jackie shows up and is desperate for her to give her fiance a job so that they can get married. And Jackie's played by Mia Farrow, who does a kind of nerve of emotion, whether she's showing love for Simon, whether she's showing hate for Simon. It's really good performance. And then Lynette is kind of played very cold. She is more sympathetic in the book, but in this version she goes to her house and the staff are lined up to meet this new American heiress who has bought this old lovely English mansion, and she just snubs them. Like, she ignores the code. If you think in Downton Abbey the right thing to do is to greet all your servants and to kind of show respect for your employees, but instead she just wants to do her own thing, and I think it really indicates how selfish she is as a person. So that when Jackie brings her fiance Simon to meet Lynette so he can get a job, it's not that much of a surprise when Jackie and Simon are looking lovingly at each other, and then it transitions to the wedding march, and suddenly Lynette and Simon are looking lovingly at each other on their wedding day. So you've got the setup of the love triangle there, and I don't think you are surprised that such a nasty person would steal like her best friend's fiance. It's a really funny version, this film. It's very light-hearted despite the high death counts. Like, you've got Colonel Race dancing with Salome Otterbourne, and she just goes freestyle. Like, she starts dancing in the opposite direction, and he has to kind of follow her and pretend they're still like partnered together, even though she's kind of off in her own world. Colonel Race is kind of an amalgamation of the character Colonel Race in the book and also James Stanthorpe, who represents Lynette's English lawyers. They're kind of suspicious that her American lawyers are doing something dodgy with her money, and it's really odd that her American lawyer has turned up on her honeymoon, because it probably has a lot to do with her suddenly marrying Simon and having access to her money therefore, because if she marries or turns 21, then she will have access to her money. And then Salome Otterbourne is probably my favourite, played by Angela Lansbury, because she shows the depressive and bitter side of this woman as well. She's become an alcoholic because her books aren't selling as well. People don't want raunchy novels anymore. And you usually just see her sort of suggestive, too much to handle side, which makes Colonel Race and Hercule Poirot run for the hills. But in this, you see the darker side, which her daughter Rosalie has to deal with. Her daughter's played by Olivia Hussey, who was a teenager as Juliet in a big version of Romeo and Juliet, which was kind of inappropriate. She was very young to play that role. And then Rosalie's love interest is an amalgamation of Mr. Ferguson and Tim Allerton from the book. He sort of shows the communist side as well, because he kind of wears a black beret and says how he thinks people like Lynette should be killed just for being rich, and that it wouldn't hurt anyone if they just disappeared from the earth. And then there's also this character who plays the boat manager, and he's played by an Indian actor, and I really like that he's kind of the only non-British character in any of these films who's got quite a large role. He's really funny. He's kind of a bit stereotypical, like it would not be PC nowadays, but I also like that he gets quite a lot of lines, and he's just horrified by everything that's going on the boat. Like, usually people just get on his boat, have a nice time sightseeing, have a holiday, and then get off the boat again. But in this, people just keep dying, and he has to deal with a snake as well. He just doesn't know what's going on. He's even at the summation gathering where Hercule Poirot says that he would only have killed Lynette if he'd mistaken her identity in the dark, which I think is really funny. This film has got a really good score as well. It feels like the SS Karnak sallying forth in the Nile. That's what the score kind of makes you feel like. And it's really funny at the end as well, because it just shows all the bodies being taken off on stretchers from the SS Karnak, and it just keeps going because so many people have died. Next is the 2004 version, which I'm quite surprised isn't my favourite version, because I really love David Suchet's portrayal of Hercule Poirot. And my flatmate has even said that the only thing I seem to watch is Agatha Christie's Poirot, which isn't quite true. He's a really good character actor. He was so dedicated to making sure that Agatha Christie's description came to life on screen. He made copious notes from all of the books on the personality and mannerisms of Hercule Poirot, and he even put a penny up his bum in order to learn the mincing walk of Hercule Poirot. I think because it was the 9th series, that's why they didn't make Colonel Race into Captain Hastings, because in earlier series they would shoehorn in, Inspector Japp or Miss Lemon, and I really enjoyed that, to have the familiar characters. But later on the series got darker, and they also only put the supporting cast in if they were actually in the book. I think it's a shame that they didn't do the Labours of Hercules as individual episodes. They sort of made them into one episode. But otherwise, I think the reason why David Suchet is people's definitive Poirot generally is because he has done basically every Poirot story. When I see Emily Blunt as Lynette, I do kind of just see blonde Emily Blunt, but at the same time it is more similar to the book. She's a sympathetic character up until when she steals Simon, and Hercule Poirot actually says to her, "You mind so much about Jackie following you on the honeymoon, even though she's not sort of threatening you physically, because it reminds you that you're guilty, that you've betrayed a friend." So I think that's quite good. They do have the plot with the necklace stealing, which I think is okay, with the Tim and Joanna sort of being cousins and having this arrangement. But I really don't like that Tim and Rosalie don't have the romance that they usually do, because she really needs it. She puts up with so much. She has to deal with Frances de la Tour's Salome Otterbourne in this version, and Poirot mops his brow after having to deal with her. Frances de la Tour is very good at playing this sort of role, because she's done it before in TV series like Rising Damp, when she keeps hitting on Philip even though he's not interested. I think this version is very good at showing Agatha Christie's idea and theme that the younger generation shouldn't have to be tethered to the older generation, that they should get a shot at life themselves. And this is shown not just through Rosalie, but also through Cornelia, who is in this version, and she is constantly mistreated by her rich cousin Marie, who basically treats her like a servant. And Mr. Ferguson takes her up on it and is like, "Why don't you hate her? Why do you put up with this?" And then she in turn gets annoyed at Mr. Ferguson, even though she's usually so wonderfully cheerful and kind. She actually gets rather annoyed because he's so political all the time, and she thinks he's horrid. And weirdly, he finds this attractive, so it's quite a funny romance. It's not as funny as the Ustinov version. Like in the Ustinov version, Poirot basically accuses everybody, and each time he accuses someone, you see a sort of scene of them doing the murder, the sort of theory of how he thinks they did it. So you see Lynette get shot many times throughout the film, and it's quite funny. But this version has a few good lines, like Jackie insults Lynette by saying that it's better to be like the Egyptian goddess who has a cow's head than to be like Lynette, who is a cow with the head of a woman. And then also when Jackie's worried about Simon and asks if he's all right, Dr. Besner is like, "Of course not, you shot him." But otherwise it is not as funny as the Ustinov version, and I think it could have done with a few more exciting things, like when Poirot has to be saved from a snake. That's just added into the Ustinov version for a bit of action. I actually saw this version in cinemas. I went to see the 2022 version, to give Kenneth Brannagh another chance, but I don't think he deserved that chance. Murder on the Orient Express was bad. I'm so glad we have the Albert Finney version to go back to. The David Suchet version is a bit too dark for me, but it is at least better than the Kenneth Branagh Poirot. It's such an ego trip to cast yourself as the world's greatest detective. Just because you put a moustache on doesn't make you Poirot unless you're like at a fancy dress party or something. And I just wish he'd stop, to be honest. He really miscalculated with casting Armie Hammer as Simon Doyle because he was the golden boy at the time. But he also miscast him because he doesn't look anything like the other two Simon Doyles. If you look at the other two Simon Doyles, they're very boyish looking and they play the charming and naive Simon very well. Whether Armie Hammer looks too old, just like he was too young for Rebecca playing Maxine de Winter, he is too old to play Simon Doyle. And the way they have him being stolen from Jackie and going to be with Lynette is really weird. They all are doing this sort of provocative dancing, which I'm pretty sure wouldn't have been socially acceptable at the time. It's very weird. And then he sort of just goes with Lynette. It's so much less impactful than in the other two versions where Jackie introduces Lynette to Simon and their eyes just meet and you can see in her eyes that she wants him. That is very clever and really well done. In this version, I do like Emma McKee as Jackie. I think she's the standout performance. She's small and fiery and dark, and I think that's exactly what Jackie's supposed to be. So I don't have any issues with her. And then Salome's done pretty well as well. But otherwise, all the characters kind of have changed plots. For some reason, Book is still there, and he's, instead of Tim Allerton, having a romance with Rosalie. The only random added subplot that I did like was having Lord Windlesham in, because I did always wonder in the book what happened to him. He's kind of the other side of the coin from Jackie, being spurned by Lynette. He genuinely thought that she would marry him, and instead she suddenly runs away with Simon. So him being on the boat and having a strong motive for killing her is quite good, and it's quite nice that he has nobly decided to be a doctor. So he's sort of amalgamated with Dr. Besner in order to help people, even though he's rich enough not to have to do that. But otherwise, the plots aren't helped. I quite like the bit where they find the maid. I think that's quite shocking. But otherwise, the other characters really fade into the distance and are very forgettable. The boat's much too big as well. Like the other two films used the same river steamer, which is beautiful and of the period and has blue lining. And then in this version it feels very CGI. It's as if it's too big. It's like 10 people on the Titanic and it's really confusing. So I just really wish that Kenneth Branagh would stop. Apparently Murder in Venice is good, so maybe I'll watch it, but he just doesn't look right for Poirot, and he keeps changing things up too much. He doesn't respect the original masterpieces of Agatha Christie. She is the greatest best-selling author of all time. She doesn't need him to make her work famous. So hopefully we will get more Poirot adaptations, but not from Kenneth Branagh.